Hey, thanks for checking out my video. Chris here from Meditations on the Tarot. Today I wanted to talk about some of the similarities and differences in the history of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. This video is part 2 in a series called Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. And if you haven't checked out part 1 yet, I would suggest that you check out part 1 first. I'll leave a link in the description and then come back and check out part 2 because I'll be referencing some of the things we talked about in the first video, and it would just make more sense if you check out that first video. So in the first video we talked about some of the similarities between Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, and we talked about that from a Masonic point of view, or from a Masonic perspective. I read from this book, Freemasonry, A History by Angel Millar, and this outlines some of the Masonic concepts and ideas about the history of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. Today I wanted to read from Rosicrucian History and Mysteries by Christian Rebisse. This is published by AMORC, the Rosicrucian Society, AMORC, to the Ancient and Mystical Order of the Rose Cross. Well, Chapter 11, Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry, the Egyptian, Essenian, and Templar origins. With the onset of the 30-Year War, Rosicrucians withdrew from the public eye. In Germany, they took refuge in the alchemical movement, which experienced significant growth at this time. However, in England, Rosicrucians were involved in the beginnings of Freemasonry. They would reappear in the middle of the 18th century, priding themselves on the origins preceding those of Freemasonry and Christianity by claiming affiliation dating back to the Egyptians. Rosicrucians and Freemasons. Freemasonry arose in England in the 18th century from fertile ground prepared by Rosicrucianism. Such authors as Johann Gottlieb Buell in 1804 and Thomas de Quincey in 1824 described Freemasonry as emanating from Rosicrucianism. As early as 1638, the relationship between the two movements was described in The Muses' Threnody, a poem by Henry Adamson that was published in Edinburgh. In this work he wrote, "For we be brethren of the Rosy Cross, we have the Mason's word in second sight. Things for to come we can foretell aright." Some years later, on October 10th, 1676, the Poor Robin's Intelligence, a London newspaper, published this notice: "The ancient Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross and the Company of Accepted Masons intend to all dine together on the 31st November next at the Flying Bull in Windmill Crown Street." This connection was again emphasized in this article in the Daily Journal of September 5th, 1730. "It must be confessed that there is a society abroad from which the English Freemasons have copied a few ceremonies, and take pains to persuade the world that they are derived from them. These are called the Rosicrucians, from their prime officers, such as our brethren called Grand Masters, Wardens, etc., being diminished on their high days by red crosses." And that's interesting because those very same quotes were also included in the last chapter that we read from Angel Millar in her book, Freemasonry, A History. Continuing, Brother I.O. "It is striking to note that the two oldest references relating to Masonic initiations concern individuals who are in direct or indirect contact with Rosicrucianism. The first reference, dating from May 20th, 1641, involves Sir Robert Moray, who was initiated into Masonry in the Mary's Chapel Lodge in Edinburgh. Interestingly enough, Moray, one of the founding members of the Royal Society and an exponent of alchemy, was the benefactor of Thomas Vaughan. The latter, using the pseudonym of Eugenius Philalethes, was the author of the Feynman Confession, the English translation of the Fama Fraternitatis and the Confessio Fraternitatis. The second reference discusses Elias Ashmole, 1617 to 1692, the noted English antiquary who was admitted into a Masonic lodge in Warrenton on October 16, 1646. 6 years later, he published the Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, a volume composed of an important collection of alchemical treatises. In the very first lines of the book, Ashmole refers to the Fama Fraternitatis. He recalls that the first Rosicrucian manifesto describing the coming of England of Brother I.O., one of our first four companions of Christian Rosencreutz. Other facts show that Ashmole took special interest in Rosicrucianism. For instance, found among his papers in the Bodleian Library is a translation in his own hand of the Rosicrucian manifestos, as well as a letter in which he applied for admission into the Rose Cross fraternity. Over a century later, Nicholas de Bonneville went so far as to say that Freemasonry had borrowed all its allegories, symbols, and words from the Rosicrucians. Although it would be incorrect to state that Freemasonry originated with the Rosicrucians, we must note that the first Freemasons were members of the English Rosicrucian movement of the 18th century. Anderson's Constitution. Masonic activities began in the 18th century, and it is generally acknowledged that the foundation date of the society was 1717, when the Grand Lodge of London was constituted. But the crucial moment in the founding of Freemasonry involves the publication of Anderson's Constitution in 1723 by the Duke of Wharton, its Grand Master at that time. This text, presented as a reorganization and correction of old Masonic archives, was edited by James Anderson, John Theophilus Desaguliers, and George Payne. The materials used were the old charges, texts belonging to the ancient fraternities or guilds of stonemasons, the oldest of which date back from the 14th century. The prime examples are the Regius MS and the Cook MS. But rather than directly descending from the old operative Masonic guilds, Freemasonry was rather a society of thinkers. The term speculative Masonry was commonly used, who described themselves as part of a lineage going back to Adam, and claiming to have inherited the liberal arts, a knowledge that was inscribed long ago on the two pillars surviving the Great Flood. Apart from the legendary history of Freemasonry, Anderson's Constitutions provided the order's rules as well as some songs meant to accompany lodge meetings. Generally speaking, the Constitution's plan was more social than spiritual. In an era marked by divisions engineered from the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, Freemasonry was content to exhort its members to that religion in which all men agree, leaving their particular opinions to themselves, that is, to be good men and true or men of honor and honesty, by whatever denominations or persuasions they may be distinguished. Hiram and Rosencreutz. Freemasonry in the early 18th century was not the organization we know today. Only after several years did it adopt its basic structure composed of 3 degrees: apprentice, fellowcraft, and master. Blue Masonry or craft degrees in the English-speaking world. Originally, it was composed of only 2 degrees, those of apprentice and companion. A third, called the master, appeared around 1730. Official references to this degree were only found in the second edition of Anderson's Constitutions of 1738, and it was not until 1760 that the symbolism attached to it, the Hiram legend, was truly adopted in England. In some ways, Hiram assumes some of the characteristics of Christian Rosencreutz. This is particularly true of the symbolism connected with the discovery of the Master's tomb. As Antoine Favre has suggested, should Hiram be perceived as being the son of Christian Rosencreutz? Also a mystical founder, the former was in that case a Christian reduced to the relative abstraction in the gallery of great hieratic figures of that tradition. In the beginning, Freemasonry did not appear as a truly initiatic society. In fact, its ceremonies were called rites of reception. The term initiation only appeared in print around 1728-1730 and did not become official in France until 1826. Although the ritual characteristics of Masonry confirmed a mysterious aspect to its meetings, the lodges were essentially places where philanthropy was practiced and the fine arts were cultivated. Only gradually did it develop an initiatic and esoteric aspect. The Egyptian Mysteries. In contrast to the Renaissance, references to Egypt had practically disappeared by the 17th century. There were, however, a few exceptions. Gerard Dorn, a disciple of Paracelsus, for example, in casting a critical eye over the esotericism of his era, felt that the primordial revelation, confided long ago to Adam and perfected by the Egyptians, had been distorted by those who had transmitted it to us, namely the Greeks. Another exception was Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar who was an expert in archaeology, linguistics, alchemy, and magnetism. Over several decades, he endeavored to unravel the secrets of Egyptian hieroglyphs. In the book Oedipus, he claimed that these mysterious characters concealed the remnants of the knowledge confided to humanity before the Great Flood. Thus he felt Egypt was the cradle of all knowledge. Before Champollion discovered the meaning of the hieroglyphs in the early 19th century, Kircher's writings were the basic reference works regarding Egypt. Two novels testifying to the renewal of interest in Egyptian esotericism were entitled Les Voyages de Cyrus, La Nouvelle Cryopede by Andrew Michael Ramsay, and Sethos, Histoire héréditaire des Monuments, Anecdotes de l'Ancien Egypte, The Life of Sethos, taken from the private memoirs of the ancient Egyptians, written in 1733 by the Abbé Jean Terrasson. In the first book, after having conversed with the Persian Zoroastrian theologians, Cyrus traveled to Thebes, where he learned the story of Hermes Trismegistus, the founder of their school. This novel, which was critical of contemporary atheism, enjoyed considerable success and was translated throughout Europe. In the second book, Abbé Terrasson allowed the reader to witness the initiation of an Egyptian prince in the secret temples of Memphis. The trials of purification by the four elements, earth, water, fire, and air, to which its heroes were subjected, were repeated by Freemasonry in its ritual. As stated by Boucher de la Richardière, the author provided such a degree of mistletoe to the disclosure of the mysteries of Isis, reputedly impenetrable until then, that you would think that they were revealed to him by one of the initiates or one of the Egyptian priests. These books made Egypt fashionable once more, as made evident by Jean-Philippe Rameau's opera ballad, The Birth of Osiris, in 1751. Some years later, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart would compose The Magic Flute, an opera which blended Masonic initiation and Egyptian tradition. The ideas developed by Ramsay and Abbé Terrasson were to stimulate the imagination of countless Freemasons in the creation of new degrees, which soon made their appearance. Indeed, within a few years, the hierarchical structure of the Masonic degrees was considerably enriched. On December 26, 1736, the Scottish Chevalier, Andrew Michael Ramsay, a father of Fenelon and May, Guyon, delivered an epoch-making speech before Louis d'Argent Lodge in Paris, which gave rise to the appearance of what are called the high degrees or side degrees. In other words, degrees superior to that of master. In his oration, Ramsay described Freemasonry as being the resurrection of the Noahite religion, a primordial, universal, and undogmatic religion. He added that this holy order was brought back to Europe by the Crusades, but was eventually forgotten except in the British Isles, and Scotland in particular. Freemasonry would now expand from Great Britain to the rest of Europe. Before long, the legends relating to the Templars, chivalry, and the Old Testament, described by Ramsay, would awaken the curiosity of the originators of the high degrees. Egyptian themes, along with occult knowledge such as alchemy, astrology, Kabbalah, and magic, were also included in these transformations. Between 1740 and 1773, the high degrees proliferated in a rather unruly way, and among them the Rose Croix reappeared in the form of a high degree. Within a short time, the latter enjoyed considerable prestige, It was seen as the final grade, even the nec plus ultra of Freemasonry. However, certain systems of the high degrees were constituted into independent orders. This was especially true in France, with the rise of the Ordre des Chevaliers, or the Order of the Knight Mason, elect priests of the universe, of Martinez de Pascalet, around 1754, or in Germany with the creation of the Rite of the strict Templar observance of the Baron Johann Gottlieb von Hund, around the very same time. It is in this period that Rosicrucianism again had the freedom to establish an autonomous order. The Golden and Rosy Cross. The Rose Croix was to reappear initially under the auspices of alchemy. Between 1700 and 1750, the Hermetic art experienced considerable growth, and numerous circles of alchemists were formed in Saxony, Silesia, Prussia, Austria, and Bavaria. It was stated that in Vienna alone there were thousands of alchemists. Most of them claimed to have drawn their inspiration from Rosicrucianism. One of these groups was the Alchemical Society of Nuremberg. According to certain authors, Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz was the secretary of this society. In 1710, 7 years before the publication of Anderson's Constitution, Sincerus Retinus, Samuel Richter, a Lutheran pastor with pietist leanings and reportedly a follower of Paracelsus and Jacob Boehme, published The True and Complete Preparation of the Philosopher's Stone of the Brotherhood from the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross. This alchemical treatise consists of practical laboratory procedures and includes an appendix of 52 rules governing the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross. These regulations indicated that the order could not be composed of more than 63 brothers, that it should be directed by an imperator elected for life. In his preface, Sincerus Retinus notes that this text is not his own work, but copied from a manuscript provided by a professor of the art, whose identity he could not reveal. He indicates that the order had two centers, one in Nuremberg and the other in Ancona, but that its members had left Europe for India a few years previously so that they could live in a more tranquil setting. This work by Sincerus Retinus was inspired by Julius Sperber's Echo of the God-Illumined Fraternity of the Venerable Order F.R.C. in 1615, and Michael Myers' Themis Aurea in 1618. It had also taken certain rules from the Order of the Inseparables, an alchemical order founded in 1577. In fact, the order described by Sincerus Retinus did not seem to have ever existed. Let us note in passing that he mentions a name, that of Golden Rosicrucians, which Peter Mormius had already used in 1630, the entire Secrets of Nature. Mormius was the author of a legend which claimed that Frederick Rose, who had lived in Dauphine, had founded in 1622 a secret society of 3 members called the Golden Rosicrucians. The phrase Golden Rosicrucians became relatively well known, and some of its rules were found much later in the Masonic Rosicrucian degree of the Prince Knights of the Rose Croix. In the following years, a Rosicrucian order was to see the light of day. In 1749, Hermann Fichtel published Aureum Velis, in which he spoke of a society of Golden Rosicrucians, which he described as being the heirs of the Golden Fleece, founded in 1429 by Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy. Around 1757, he created a Masonic rite, the Societas Rosae et Aurea Crucis, Fraternity of the Golden Rosy Cross, that had alchemical and pietist leanings, and was composed of a series of Rosicrucian degrees. This fraternity thrived in many towns such as Frankfurt, Maine, Marburg, Kassel, Vienna, and Prague. It appears to have become extinct around 1764, but in actuality it reformed itself through the efforts of Dr. Bernard Joseph Schloss von Lohenfeld and Joseph Wilhelm Schroeder. It finally gave rise to another Rosicrucian Masonic rite which appeared between 1770 and 1777 in Bavaria, Austria, Bohemia, and Hungary. It was first adopted by the Crescent of Three Keys, a Masonic lodge in Regensburg. In 1771, it was adopted as well by the Hope Lodge in Vienna, which gave rise to the Three Swords Lodge. The latter became the breeding ground of this Rosicrucian Masonic rite, which fostered alchemy and theurgy. The Golden Rosy Cross of the Ancient System. In 1776, some members of the Three Swords Lodge constituted a new Rosicrucian Masonic order called the Order of the Golden Rosy Cross of the Ancient System. Instrumental in this effort were Johann Rudolf von Bischenswerder, a Prussian officer who became Minister of War after the death of Frederick the Great, and Johann Christoph Wallner, the economic advisor to the King of Prussia. The Grand National Mother Lodge of the Three Globes of Berlin became the center of this order's activities. A hierarchy of 9 degrees was adopted, namely Zelator, Theoreticus, Practicus, Philosophus, Adeptus Minor, Adeptus Major, Adeptus Exemptus, Magister Templi, and Magus, whose symbolic aspects were incorporated into the documents reformed in 1777 during the convention held by the order in Prague. As René Le Forester has indicated, the teachings of the junior zealoters copied 110 pages of George von Willing's Opus Mago Kabbalisticum et Theosophicum, 1719, a book which introduced Gautier to Rosicrucian thought sometime later. The instructions and ritual of the Theoretici were borrowed from the Novum Laboratorium Medicicum of Christoph Glaser. As for the alchemical operations taught to the magistracy, these were taken from 2 books by Heinrich Kunrath, Confessio Deceo Physico and Amphitheorium Sapiente. The rituals and teachings of this order were now clearly oriented toward alchemy. This movement, which blended alchemy, Rosicrucianism, and Freemasonry, produced the celebrated book entitled Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians of the 16th and 17th centuries. Composed primarily of magnificently illustrated alchemical treatises, it is often presented as the most significant Rosicrucian book after the 3 manifestos. And so that book, The Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians, that's a set of 2 books, and those are really fantastic. You can look at those books and download those books for free if you go to rosicrucian.org. And so I thought it was worth mentioning. Those are some really great books. The Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians. The Essenes and the Templars. The Masonic Order of the Golden Rosy Cross of the Ancient System. We specify here Masonic so as to distinguish this movement from recent groups which use the same name without having any connections to the 18th century Rosicrucians. Possessed a characteristic which differentiated it from the 17th century Rosicrucianism. It claimed a lineage dating back to Ormus, or Ormisius, an Egyptian priest baptized by Saint Mark. Ormus thus Christianized the Egyptian mysteries and founded the Order of Ormisians, bestowing upon it the symbol of a golden cross enameled in red. In AD 151, the Essenes were combined with them, and the order then took the name Guardians of the Secret of Moses, Solomon, and Hermes. After the 4th century, the order never counted more than 7 members. In the 12th century, it admitted a few Templars, and when the Christians lost Palestine in 1118, the members of the order scattered around the world. 3 of them settled in Europe and founded the Order of the Builders of the Orient. Raymond Lully was admitted into this order, and soon afterwards he initiated Edward I of England. Eventually, only members of the houses of York and Lancaster could be dignitaries of the order. It was for this reason that the rose, the badge of both families was placed on a golden cross, the symbol of the order. Initiated Knights and Brothers of Asia. It was in this way that the Masonic Order of the Golden Rosy Cross came into being. Despite its mythical lineage, this order, which arose in Germany in the 18th century, basically developed in the wake of the strict Templar observance, which was at that time the most important Masonic rite in Germany. It should be emphasized that until this period, Rosicrucianism had only given rise to small groups whose rituals have remained undiscovered, whereas the Masonic Order of the Golden Rosy Cross of the ancient system has left numerous documents attesting to its activities. It expanded widely through Central Europe, and many individuals such as Prince Frederick William of Prussia and Nikolai Novikov, a Russian journalist and philanthropist, were members. It was disbanded by its members in 1787 after having given rise to the Initiated Knights and Brothers of Asia, of which Landgrave Charles of Hesse-Kassel was the Grand Master. The enigmatic Comte de Saint-Germain was, no doubt, part of this movement, seeing that he resided with Landgrave Charles, his pupil and benefactor, from 1778. The Rose-Croix degree. The Rose-Croix degree appeared within the Freemasonry at practically the same time as the Order of the Golden Rosy Cross of the ancient system. The existence of this high degree was confirmed for the first time in 1757 under the title of Rosicrucian Knight in the activities of the Children of Wisdom in Concord Lodge. As we have already seen, the Rose-Croix degree was quickly considered to be the nec plus ultra of Masonry. It was the seventh and final degree of the Rite Français of 1786 and the 18th of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. It did, however, present a specific aspect that was to inspire countless debates. Until then, the entirety of the Masonic degrees emphasized the universality of wisdom, whereas this degree was specifically Christian in character. For that reason, certain Freemasons tried to de-Christianize it in the 19th century by proposing a philosophical interpretation of its symbolism. Baron Charles Theodore Chowsky saw it as Catholicism put into a degree form. It is true that its symbolism does not refer to themes found in the 17th century Rosicrucianism. Rather than discussing Christian Rosenkreuz, it describes Calvary on Golgotha, and then the resurrection of Christ, and is composed of a love feast in which bread and wine are shared, a ceremony resembling the Last Supper. While being initiated into this degree, the recipients relive the wandering that followed the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. They seek the lost word, and their journey allows them to discover the three virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Finally, the secret meaning of INRI is revealed to them. So the esoteric meaning of INRI is all of nature is renewed through fire, and this is an alchemical concept, and you'll see this INRI on the Hermetic Golden Cross or the Hermetic Rose Cross. It has these barbs that come out in the four directions, and these represent the four directions, and also the letters INRI. And esoterically, that means all of nature is renewed through fire. The most ancient rituals of the Rose-Croix degree date from 1760 and 1761, just a few years after the appearance of the Societas Rosae et Aurea Crucis at Frankfurt. An exchange of correspondence in June 1761 between the Masons of Metz and those of Lyons inform us that the latter carried out a degree unknown to their brothers in Metz, that of the Knight of the Eagle, Pelican, Knight of St. Andrew, and Mason of Herodom, which are simply other designations of the Masonic Rose-Croix degree. The discourse accompanying another version of the degree described the order's origins by referring to the Sabians, Brahmins, Magi, Hierophants, and Druids, which it describes as being the ancestors of the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians are portrayed as the heirs of an initiatic chain, whose links comprise the Egyptians, Zoroastrians, Hermes Trismegistus, Moses, Solomon, Pythagoras, Plato, and the Essenes. This lineage recalls the one put forth by Michael Meyer in Silentium Post Clamores, by reviving the concept of the primordial tradition cherished by the Hermeticism of the Renaissance. This concept is again found in the regulator of the Knights Masons of the four superior orders according to the regime of the GO. Spiritual knighthood. The elements found in the Masonic Rose-Croix degree undoubtedly originated in a manuscript discovered in Strasbourg in 1760. This text, entitled De la Macaron parmi les chrétiens, a mystery among Christians, touched upon the origins of Freemasonry in a singular manner by suggesting that the Masons are the descendants of the canons of the Holy Sepulchre, who were the Rosicrucian guardians of the Essenian traditions. These canons would later confine their secret teachings to the Templars. Egypt, the Essenes, and Templars are generally referred to in these 18th century Masonic Rosicrucian degrees as being initiatic sources. They try to connect Rosicrucianism with the sages of the ancient religions and with an often idealized original Christianity through the Essenes and Templars. In fact, they again pose the problem of what the sources of the tradition are and how the different initiatic currents are related. Admittedly, the way such origins are depicted cannot be taken literally, and Henry Corbin takes René de la Forester to task for being content in looking at such subjects only from this perspective. It matters little whether such an individual as Ormus ever really existed. For Corbin, this lineage can be understood only by putting aside historical institutions. The Essenes, the canons of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Templars should be considered basically as symbols referring to a new, higher reality. Thus, some orders hold themselves up to ridicule when they pretend to be the Templar successors by reviving rites and accoutrements that have lost their meaning. As Joseph de Maistre said in his Memoir de Brunswick, initiation existed before the Templars, and it will continue to be perpetuated long after them. Corbin observes in the myths connected with the orders we have just mentioned some elements reflecting a spiritual filiation through a spiritual knighthood. This fraternity of light has operated since the beginning of creation itself for the elevation of humanity toward the spiritual temple. In other words, to the reconciliation of humanity as God. As he states, the continuity of this tradition is not dependent on an imminent historical casualty. It can only be expressed in symbols. Its transmitters are raised to the rank of symbolic personalities. The filiation of the movements working for this purpose are not to be found in visible history, but in hierohistory or sacred history. In this sense, it is not incorrect to see affiliation in these different movements, provided that it is not taken literally. However, it should be noted that in the era of which we are speaking, the Rose-Croix was often presented as the jewel of this spiritual knighthood. The Enlightenment and Illuminism. Thus, the 18th century witnessed the creation of the multitude of initiatic orders. We have mentioned here only those related directly or indirectly to Rosicrucian Masonry. The proliferation of such orders often cause confusion in the esoteric world. In its midst, a clash was already taking place between positivists favoring the Enlightenment and spiritualists favoring Illuminism. With the Neoplatonic campaigns in Egypt, the fascination with this ancient land grew, and Western esotericism was shaken by a discovery opening up new horizons: magnetism. And then the next chapter goes into magnetism and some of these different characters. So that's Freemasonry, Rosicrucian History and Mysteries by Christian Rebisse, and the chapter was called Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. And so that talks about these connections from a Rosicrucian point of view, from a Rosicrucian perspective. So if you've already watched video 1 and you just are finished listening to this video, I think you'll already be able to see that there are some very key differences in the way that Rosicrucians view the relationship between Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, and the way that Freemasons view this relationship. So in the next video will be part 3. Then we're going to talk about some very specific points in both books, some of the similarities in both books, and some of the differences in both books. And we're also going to look from a third point of view, and that would be from an occult or esoteric scholar. So in the next video, I'm going to be talking about the similarities and differences between Rosicrucian History and Mysteries and Freemasonry, a History. And I'm going to be reading a little bit from The Invisible History of the Rosicrucians by Tobias Churton. And this is more of a scholarly book. This is not from a Masonic point of view. This is not from a Rosicrucian point of view, but this is from a third point of view, which is that of an occult scholar, Tobias Churton. So I just wanted to take the time. I just wanted to thank you for taking your time to watch the video. If you would like to like my video, share it on social media, subscribe to my channel, that'd be really great. I would appreciate it. Peace profound, and L.V.X.